In this video, I'll go over how to iterate through lists, and I also want to do a few list operations like appending to lists and removing items from lists. But first, iteration is when you do something to each element of a collection, and each iteration statement begins with the keyword for. So let's start with a list of strings. So we have here data, which equals this list of strings, and let's make an iteration statement. So for sequence in data, print sequence. So what this is doing is it's this code saying, all right, well, let me look in data, which is this list, and for each item in that list, I'm going to print that item. And so sequence, we could have said for item in data, but because we're trying to be more bioinformatically terminology friendly or whatever, I'm sticking with sequence. So let's actually visualize what's going on. This is a loop, and it's going to continue to go through until there's no more items to look through. So first we have the data, and it corresponds to this list of characters with index 0, 1, and 2, or this list of strings. So it's saying, all right, so for sequence in data, saying, all right, sequence equals ACAC. Well, let's print that. And it prints it out right there. And it goes back up. And it's like, all right, for sequence in data, are there any more sequences in data? And it goes to index 1. It's like, all right, yes, there is. There is TG. Well, let's print that and go back up. Are there any more sequences in data? Yes, there's CGAT. Let's print that. It prints that. It goes back up. Are there any more sequences in data? No, there's not. Program terminated. Pretty simple, right? But let's say that we want to print out each letter of those sequences. So let's go here. So for letter in sequence, print letter. All right. So what this is doing is, all right, so this is for sequence in data. It hits that first sequence, ACAC. All right, well, now that we're there, for each letter in sequence, let's print that letter. And it will loop through each time. So there's our list, for sequence in data, sequences, ACAC. It goes down to the next for loop. So we have for letter in sequence. All right, what's the first letter? It's A. Let's print that. Goes back up. Are there any more letters in sequence? Yes, there's C. Let's print that. Are there loops back up to the for loop? Are there any more? A, C, all right. Are there any more letters? No. Let's go back up to the original for sequence in data. Are there any more sequences in data? Yes, we have TG. All right. For the letter in that sequence, we have T. So what these for loops are doing, it loops through each for loop. It will continue looping through this inner for loop until there's nothing else to loop through. Then it'll go back to the original for loop. And then it'll loop through that. And so it'll keep going round and around. So it's going to print all of the things in the sequence TG. Then once there's nothing else, it's going to go back to the original for loop. All right, is there any more sequences in data? Yes, in index 2, there's an item. All right, so let's print all of those letters. And it prints all of those letters out. This will be useful for when we make a code for phylogeny trees, because I know that I'm going to be making a video on that, because I have a small code that shows how to make a tree using Python, and being able to iterate through a list and pick out what you want from those lists and print where you want them is important. So I will be making a separate video talking about that, but this is the bare bones of how that works. Let's do a few list operations. So let's make two lists. We're going to have data and data 2 equals. Let's have CGGA and TAG. Alright, so there's list operations such as, let's first index, like add to a list by changing one of its indexes. So let's say data 0 equals AGGA. So what this is doing is it's going to put at index 0 of data, which is this index here, it's going to replace that string with this string right here. We can also append to a list. So data.append, and let's append GGGG. So this is going to append to this list this string. So it's basically adding to that list. So instead of just having index 0, index 1 will now have index 0, 1, and 2. Data.extend, let's do AGAG. What this does is this adds to the list each item in this string. So instead of adding this whole entire thing, it's going to add an A, comma, G, comma, A, comma, G. So it's adding each thing to the list. You can remove things. Let's say data.remove, and then let's remove A, but that will only remove the first one. Now let's say we want to data.extend data2. So say you use the extend function and it added each one of these letters separately, and you're like, darn, that's not what I wanted. This data extend will extend each one of these as a string because it's within a list. When I show you, will make a little bit more sense. Let me actually do it that way. Append data2. So visualizing it will actually make more sense. So we have our two lists right here, and we're going to add AGAG, or we're going to replace this index AC with AGAG. So you can see that just happened. Data.append GGGG, what this is going to do, we can see it just appended it to the list, added it on to the list. Now data.extend AGAG, this is going to extend each one of these letters separately, like that, which most of you are like, that would not work. So let's remove A. That removed the first instance of A. It did not remove all of them. Now, data.extend data2 is going to add each of these strings to data. It's not going to add each letter. It's going to extend or add each of those strings, right? So if we go forward, you can see it added each of those strings to it because it adds whatever each one of the contents of that container. So for when we did it here with AGAG, the container was a string. So each content in that container was a character. So it added each one of the characters. In data2, the container is a list. So it adds each element of that list, which each element is the entire string. Hopefully that makes sense. Now if we do the append function for data2, it's going to add the list instead of the string. So if we do that, let's go forward. It adds the list. It appends the entire list to data instead of adding each element. This might seem confusing when practicing and when you're trying to figure out how to add stuff to lists, and especially when you have lists within lists and it gets complicated. Knowing the difference between extend and append will be very useful.